Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on what part of the world you are in. And welcome to our webinar, Anyone Can Make a Difference. This webinar is hosted by friends of Yad Sarah. And during this event, we will discuss the different types of charitable giving, the joys of giving, and how to maximize your giving impact. We arranged this webinar for you to hear firsthand about the positive impact that one can experience from giving back to their community. Let me introduce our panelists. Before I do, maybe it's better that I introduce myself. I'm Michael Miller, and I'm a proud board member of Friends of Yad Sarah. And now let me introduce our panelists. First, Gideon Bernstein. Gideon is the author of Giving, a Handbook to Happiness for the Modern Philanthropist, a simple step-by-step guide for modern philanthropists. And Gideon serves as a trusted financial advisor, and his passion is working with nonprofit boards, families, and private foundations to help them achieve their philanthropic missions. Next, let me introduce Rose. Rose was born in France and moved to the US after World War II. She's a retired foreign language teacher, author, and volunteer. Rose is the mother of two wonderful children and has overcome many obstacles in her life, including being laid off during New York City's fiscal crisis back in 1976. And David Weinstein. David served as a teacher of mathematics for over 50 years. For 24 years, he was assistant chairman of math at the very well-known Brooklyn Technical High School, Brooklyn Tech, one of the three specialized schools for talented students in New York City. He was also the principal at two private schools and is active in communal affairs. It's a pleasure to have all three of our panelists on with us today. So let's get this conversation going. I'm first going to start with Gideon. I have a copy of Gideon's book here, and I read through it. Gideon, it was really fascinating, and I learned a tremendous amount. And you start off the book by talking about the fact that you have the secret to happiness. Gideon, what is the secret to happiness?
Well, unfortunately, the secret has been given away from behind me. I like to use that as an introduction, because I think that a lot of times when folks are looking at philanthropy and ways to give back, there's a lot of trepidation that comes along with it, that they're going to be giving away all their money or not enough left for their estate. And what we'll be talking about today is the fact that, you know, the secret to happiness is giving. It's giving your time, it's giving your treasure, and it's finding ways to help other people.
Yeah, it's interesting as well that a little bit further into the book, you have a quote from the Harvard Business School that people are happier when they spend money on others than when they spend money on themselves. So let me turn to Rose and to David. Are you happier because you are a contributor as opposed to when you are not? Rose?
Absolutely, yes.
And David?
No question about it.
And it's also interesting, and David could pick up on this, although it was written in Gideon's book. He speaks about a warm glow effect. So despite the fact that you may or may not have read the book, maybe you could define for Gideon what he wrote about, David. What is a warm glow effect regarding giving?
When you give to somebody else, you feel good about yourself and you're doing something worthwhile. You're not thinking that you're the only person in the world. You have to think about others if you really want to make a contribution to life.
I agree with that. Rose, you want to add to that?
I'm so grateful to be able to help others. There was a time when I absolutely could not. And so I'm doubly grateful, and I feel an extra dose of glow, if you will, because I now can.
Right. And Gideon, you wrote in the book that giving rewards both the giver and the receiver. So we're hearing from David and Rose how giving has rewarded them. Do you have any other interpretation of what you have written beyond what David and Rose have indicated?
Well, there are actually have been a lot of studies about giving that have been done over time. You mentioned the Harvard Business School study, but there's also studies that have been done from the National Institute on Aging and National Science Foundation, where they actually do MRIs in studies on subjects, and they actually see the pleasure centers of the brain showing activity and reactivity in the studies that have been done. So there's scientific fact behind the real healthy implications of giving in any way, shape, or form.
So thank you, Dave, Gideon. Gideon, again, who taught you this concept of giving being a value? Is it something that you arrived at on your own, or is, and this really is for all of our panelists, is there a philanthropic role model for you, and who would it be? Gideon?
So I actually dedicated the book that I wrote to my parents, who were the ones that really led the way. They came from very modest means, and as Rose mentioned, there's times in your life where you really are more of the receiver than the giver. But I watched the evolution of my parents over time, and seeing that that what they were doing from a volunteer basis. This was, just starting at very grassroots levels with organizations, and for example, with their synagogue, and being really involved in helping to build community, and watching that turn into them really becoming philanthropists and giving back to organizations, including Yad Sarah, which is how I was introduced. In fact, some of what they've done has led to opportunities like this. Yad Sarah helped my grandmother out when she was, in her last few years in Israel. And now the reciprocation is that my family got involved and started giving back to the organization as well. So that was really the inspiration of philanthropy from my beginning.
Thank you. Rose, do you want to address that, please, as to who your role
My
model
mother
is
had
in
a
philanthropy?
saying,
Yeah.
money that you spend on charity or on education is money you will never miss. And that was my guide.
That was your mother? I kind of
My
spoke
mother.
with your mother. Wow, quite a lesson. David?
Me, it's a very religious aspect to a certain degree.
Please.
I believe probably the most important thing to teach me the value of giving came from the Bible. If you take a look at the Bible, it says, do not harden your heart or close your hand against your needy brother. Open your hand wide to him. Do not feel bad about giving him. It will be a source of blessing for you. This kind of comment is made at least scores of times throughout the Bible. It becomes part of you after a certain amount of time. Beside that, the Bible talks about gifts and tithes for the poor people who are in the area. I mean, everything is based upon giving. If you take a look, I can give you one quick example. We just celebrated the holiday of Purim.
Yes.
So in Purim, there are two main things which one is told to do. One thing he's told to do is to give gifts to the poor people. And the second thing he's told to do is make a feast in honor of the miracle that actually occurred. So what do the rabbis say? The rabbis say that the most important thing, obviously, is giving gifts to the poor. But even if you make a feast and you don't have a poor person at the feast. Now what occurs is it's like a feast of your stomach. That's how it's described. And then if you have poor people over there, it's like you're inviting God to be with you at the event. That's one important thing. And the Rambam, who lived about 900 years ago.
That's Maimonides, yes.
Maimonides, yes. He said that I have never heard or seen a Jewish community that did not have an organization to help the poor people. And believe it or not, that's what I saw throughout my life. I lived in two different neighborhoods. Each one had many communal organizations. And beside that, they have private organizations, which is called a gemach. And if you want anything, you want money, you need a loan, you need a wedding dress, you need pillows, you need food, you need clothing, they're always available to give us. So really, the two places I lived in 95% of my life had organizations like this. So really, it's been part of my life from the beginning. And the other thing I want everybody to understand, it's not only the Jewish responsibility to help Jews, but it's a global responsibility. And the Jew is as obligated to help other Jews as they are to help Gentiles or anybody else.
Right. Well, thank you very much, David. I'll go back to you in a moment. I first want to turn again to Rose. Gideon spoke about his parents identifying with Yad Sarah because Yad Sarah helped them, helped his mother. Rose, why did you turn to Yad Sarah?
I was on a flight to Israel to visit my aunt, excuse me, and in the pocket was a magazine that had an article about Yad Sarah. I read the article and it sounded so good. I asked my aunt's husband, my uncle, did he know the organization, and he raved about it. And that's how I started giving to Yad Sarah.
Wow. And David, how did you come to become a donor to Yad Sarah?
My wife and my daughter went to Israel when she started high school. My wife would love to go to Israel on Aliyah, so they decided to see if my daughter could possibly adjust. While she was over there, she volunteered at Yad Sarah because other friends of hers were already working there. And she also, at the same time, besides working in the main office in Jerusalem, she visited a blind person each week where they learned from the Bible. That was the introduction. And then I just heard wonderful things throughout the year that Yad Sarah is supportive of all these people who need help, the wonderful work they do. So when she came back, we made a charitable gift annuity. And then through the years, we've given other gifts to them because we see the wonderful work that they do every day.
Wow, that's extraordinary. Gideon, you also write in the book about people holding back on philanthropic giving. Can you address the issue of hesitation, of why people are at times reluctant to make a contribution?
Well, I think that one of the number one concerns that people have is that they're going to outlive their their finances in their lives. And so it's definitely a challenge, especially given a lot of the uncertainty that we have with the economy and the financial markets and all the geopolitical issues that are going on. There's always an excuse that comes up that creates this insecurity for giving or giving it all away. And I've seen a lot of seminars and discussions about this and training through charitable organizations on talking with donors about the concept of really looking at giving as having like another child or another grandchild. So yes, you want to have enough money to be able to sustain yourself and your health and in your lifetime. And yes, you want to have money that goes to your kids and your grandkids. And the concept of charitable giving and doing that as a mitzvah is really just adding on your favorite charitable organizations as like an additional child or grandchild. So instead of giving it all the way at one time, you're really looking at it as just an add-on where another 1, 3, 5% of your giving or estate is going to that additional child that you really want to see grow into adult, whatever the charitable organization is. So to me, the insecurity part and having the conversations about really being able to just create a sleeve of giving that makes you feel more comfortable that you're not going to give it all away is really the key.
Right. And David, you probably have had friends that you've spoken to about various charities. How do you, and I'll ask the question of Rose as well, how do you approach individuals about making a philanthropic gift? when you know that they may be somewhat hesitant along the lines of what Gideon was talking about?
I usually am not the gift. I'm a gift giver, but I'm not very good at speaking to other people to give gifts. And to me, one very important kind of thing that one should know, related to what Gideon said about people's hesitation, is what I call a donor advised fund, which Gideon writes about in his book on
Yes.
many, many of the pages. Can I talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, please go ahead, David.
Because to me, it's probably my main financial source, how I arrange what I'm going to give as a gift. A donor advised fund has become enormously popular over the last couple of years, and they've tripled the amount of people that have gone into it. So let me explain to the people who are listening to this what it's all about. It's a fund where you take money and you get an immediate tax deduction when you give it into the donor advised fund. And then you're allowed to take out the money whenever you want to. And at that time, you can give to any charity at any time. The benefits of something like this are that if you want to give something like stocks that have appreciated. So suppose you bought stocks for $20,000 and now they're worth $50,000. So what you do is you give the money to charity, you get a $50,000 deduction, and you don't have to decide at that time where the money is going to go. You are allowed any time in the future to decide on any charity that you would like to give it to. Especially with the tax laws which we have nowadays, this is a very important thing, because one of the only things you could actually get a tax deduction for now is charitable giving, which everybody should understand. The second benefit over here, so therefore you get a $50,000 donation to charity, which is on your income tax return for that year. And at the same time, you don't have to pay the extra taxes on the increase that you ordinarily would have to pay, which is on that extra $30,000 that you don't pay taxes on, because that's the basis of what you have. The second thing, which is important, is that you get an immediate tax deduction. The third is that you have a certain flexibility. For example, somebody came over to me, it's right before Passover, and they collect money for people for the holidays. So you want to give a nice donation and you don't have to worry, where am I going to get the money from? The money is over there. So all you have to do is go to the computer, and 5 minutes later, they will make out a check and send it to that person, and so forth. Another very important thing is that the money is invested. So if you take a look at the stock market for the last 2 years, it went up 20% one year and 20% the next year. So all the money that you have put in the donor advised fund is earning that stock market increase at the same time. So therefore, what I was able to do 2 years ago, the last 2 years, is give several $1,000s more without giving more money to charity, because the money increased on its own. One other thing is you can make a legacy fund out of it as well. You were talking about a legacy before. So what one could do is one could put money in there. You could have an advisor, you could have successor advisors who could be your children. So therefore, even if you pass away, you still have the funds over there. There are people who can give advice where the money can go, or you could take percentages out of each one that when you pass away, it goes directly to the charities that you set aside. So you could build a legacy up at the same time.
Right. I'm just going to ask, everything you described is very important for our viewers and listeners to hear. But I'm just going to ask you to pause, and I want to turn to Gideon to see whether he wants to add anything above and beyond what you've already spoken about, David, pertaining to donor advised funds. So,
he's the expert.
Right. Gideon, do you want to weigh in on that? Since, as David said, there are quite a number of pages in the book about donor advised funding.
Yeah, David. David did a great highlight of it all. There's, the donor advised funds, which are obviously a very popular vehicle for being able to basically create a philanthropic bank for yourself. And it goes back to your question, which is, what are the hesitations that people have? This is one way where you can just take appreciated stock or cash, and you can just take a sleeve of your liquid investments and be able to put them inside a charitable fund that you can give away at any time in your life. And you can also have your kids or grandkids help out with that giving. He also mentioned legacy giving, which is really the opportunity to create endowments that are going to be perpetual for the rest of your life. And David mentioned earlier that he had set up a charitable gift annuity with Yad Sarah, which is another way of creating something that's a very long rewarding gift that you can do to an organization while you also get current income as a donor. So there's a lot of ways to work as a donor to be able to have your cake and eat it too, as I think David would agree on.
Right, thank you. Rose, yeah, I want to ask you to weigh in on this.
I'd like to make a little comment about David's example. I think the minimum amount that you can give to set anything up is $5,000, right? Is that right, Gideon?
No, there's actually, you can create donor advised funds for much lower minimums as well.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Because I just want to make want to establish the fact that you can start giving way before you have $20,000 worth to donate.
Absolutely, Rose.
Right. Yeah, no, that's very important. The question right now I'm going to pose is where to donate, and how much investigation do you engage in? This is more directed to Rose and David. Of course, Gideon can weigh in too, as to which organizations you want to support. Rose, you told us a story about Yad Sarah. David told us a story as well. But before you make a contribution, what do you do? What do you engage in order to determine who to give to?
My son guided me to Charity Navigator.
Yes.
And I have used that to help me decide where to donate some money. And there is a major Jewish organization that I will not give to because their overhead is so large. They do a lot of good, but with that large an overhead, I don't think my $1 is going as far as it could be going. So I check it out.
Great. David, do you do the same?
Not really. I've been giving to certain organizations for 50 years already. So over the years, each time you begin, I think the major organization which people give to are those which they have experience, those which they are involved in. So therefore, over the years, I give small, I'll mention, if you want to hear what I do, I give a certain percentage of money to smaller organizations, which means donations under $100. And what I do with this is I give these donations once a year, basically. Why? Because people, you get in the mail every single day, you get 20 different letters in the mail where people want money. So therefore, the smaller donations I usually give at Rosh Hashanah time, which is in September. So I don't have to worry, did I give, did I not give? I make all the checks out at one time over there. And then what I do is I use qualified charitable distributions for monies which I give to more important organizations. So this would be maybe a few $100s to each one of them. And then what I also do is I use the donor advised fund to give money to organizations which I'm really involved in. So what do I do? So what you have to do is what Rose mentioned. You have to find out about how the charity operates, what the purpose of the charity is, what the impact of the charity is, what's the financial status of the charity. And one thing which I've done with my wife for the last 2 years is, since we want to give bigger donations as we get older, we actually spend several days every time we go to Israel, and we visit the institutions to see what's going on.
Right.
It's a phenomenal experience. Instead of looking at all the mountains, instead of looking at other things in Israel, I highly advise people to really check out the organization by visiting them and firsthand seeing exactly what's going on.
Right. Thank you. Gideon, do you want to add to that in terms of investigation of the charities that you give to beyond what Rose and David outlined?
Rose highlighted a very important resource, which is Charity Navigator. That's used by a lot of organizations and individuals to be able do research and find the organizations that really meet what your criteria are as a giver. And as Rose said, in some circumstances, you find some organizations with high overhead, and maybe you might avoid that. I'm on a private foundation board, and so we use a criteria and a ranking system, which involves Charity Navigator too. The one thing that I talk about in our board meetings, though, is that sometimes the organizations that do have the high overhead and a lot of those expenses, which on the surface seems like a waste of money as a donor, might be because they have such great people there that are providing programming and services. There's really nothing tangible that they're offering. It's most of the intangibles that you're investing in, and leadership development and those types of areas where you want to create community. There's still some wonderful benefits as far as criteria going, trying to find those organizations that can do those things even with the high overhead that exists. So there's the grassroots opportunity, which are the ones where you're basically just finding things in your community or by word of mouth. And then there's obviously a lot of research that you can do if you go on a Charity Navigator and find a lot of other organizations you can give to.
Yeah.
And Gideon, something that you wrote about in your book that I didn't think of as being part of charitable giving. You know that in your book, you talk about this man who ended up being homeless unexpectedly, and you gave him $100, and how incredibly grateful he was, and what a tremendous difference it made in his life for the following few days. And I think that's an important part of charitable giving. It can be anonymous, as you also referred to, or in person. Just a little bit for someone who's struggling can mean the world, whether it's money or other kind of help.
Oh, that's very, very important, Rose. I also want to mention that Yad Sarah, the organization that we're speaking to today, has had the highest 4-star rating on Charity Navigator for the past 9 years consecutively. So kol hakavod, as we would say in Hebrew, to Yad Sarah, thumbs up from Gideon. And I think that in that regard, you also speak in the book, Gideon, about a helper's high. So maybe you could just go into that a little bit.
Yeah, I had mentioned earlier that there was that study by the National Science Foundation that was referencing the MRIs that were done for givers that, basically was finding that, the parts of the brain, that's the part that is the pleasure center, that also has the social connection and trust. That is all the factors that create that warm glow effects that you get as a giver. And, there's an experiment that I'd like to share with everyone about that, because I think that the best way that you can get that immediate high is doing something that's a little bit impulsive. And I'll give you an example. This just happened the other day. I was coming out of meeting at a hotel, and it was in downtown LA. And a woman walked by and she asked me for a little bit of money. And, usually you start judging because you're like, okay, well, is she going to go use it for drugs? Or is she going to go use it for, going to get some alcohol? She said she wanted to go get a Starbucks for she wanted $7 to go get a Starbucks. And the doorman's standing right there. And I said, well, I don't have $7. And, but I opened up my wallet and I gave her a $20 bill. And she said, thank you. And she walked away. And the doorman looked at me and he said, he says, wow, she's been coming here doing this for years. She hits up all the tourists and people that walk by the door. And, and he kind of gave me a little bit of a sour look, like he just got suckered. And I looked at him, I said, I don't care. I said, I'm not here to judge what she needed the money for. She needed it more than me. And so whatever the purpose is of what she's using it for is not as important as the fact that I did something out of the goodness of my heart to try to help her out. So that's the warm glow effect that you get from being able to do it. And there's a couple of other more organized ways that I've done it too that are, I'd say, more calculated. But for me, doing that once in a while where there's somebody that's in need, you have to open your heart and not harden your heart to the needs that other people have.
All right, thank you. Well, speaking about opening hearts, let's talk about the next generation. We're on this webinar with 3 individuals, but we wouldn't be here without our parents, and we may have children, we may have grandchildren. What do you do as a family member to encourage the next generation to be as generous as you have been, and to instill within them this value of tzedakah, this value of charity? Rose?
They just know how I feel about sharing. And one of my children is excessively generous and the other one not. And that's the personality.
Hopefully they're watching this webinar and this will
No.
inspire. David?
We have a different generation now than we had way back when. And it's not that kids do what the parents say, kids do what the parents do.
Right.
So what the parents have to really do around the house is that if they're going to a meeting, a charitable meeting, or they're going to do something for the community, they should come home with a smile on the face and say to the kids, look what I did tonight. Look, they should get their kids involved in on-hands activity, because the most powerful thing for kids is when they give money or they collect money or they have a bike ride. But the most important thing is that the kids have to have on-hands activity and helping somebody else. They have to create what we call a culture of giving.
Correct.
And we did something like that at my synagogue. When everybody was bashing the police over the past year, my synagogue had kids, young kids, make certain items, paintings, drawing pots, and so forth. They called the police department up, they came over, and they sang for them, they gave them the gifts, and they said, we appreciate what you're doing for us. It's a sign of the gratitude that they had for what was happening in the community.
Right.
And this is what people have to do.
Right.
They have to do good things and they have to be appreciated. So, parents really should say to their kids, hey, I'm setting up a fund. You could have 10% of that fund this year. You decide upon the charity you'd like to get involved. And I see this all the time, especially in the school system, that we have loads of kids that spend their summer working at what we call Chai Lifeline, Hebrew Academy of Special Children. They spend 8 weeks over there taking the most disabled kids you could possibly imagine, and they give up their life, their time, just to be able to be helpful to them without getting any money.
That's so important. Gideon, can you speak to this role of modeling for future generations?
Yeah, the advent of the what David had mentioned earlier, the concept of the donor advised fund has really come in the last 30 plus years, where you actually have these accounts that are set up where you can just go online and you can gift money away. And I think it's really revolutionized the ability for giving to be more organized, to be able to do with your family, because now every year around Hanukkah, we sit down with our kids and we say, hey, we're going to give some money away and we're going to let you guys pick out the charities that you want to give the money to. So, we say, here's some money that's inside the fund. You guys get to make the recommendations on that. So it's a way to engage them in finding and identifying something that means something to them, even though it might not be something that I select as a donor. But I think that that's the way to initiate it. Now, that's the financial component of it. Then the other part is more of like the activist and humanitarian efforts that you can make these days, being volunteering, like David was talking about, of the kids going to work at camps and learning that from their peer group as well.
Right. Before I ask my next question of Gideon, I just want to say to our viewers that if you have a question, there is a Q&A function at the bottom of your, at least on my screen, at the bottom of the screen, but there is a Q&A function, and feel free to put a question in there that I hope I'll be able to share with our panelists. And so Gideon, it's a question which I think many people have asked: is it better to give small contributions to many organizations or large contribution to a single or two organizations? Is there any better way of doing this? How would you approach that question? How would you respond to it?
Yeah, I think that depends on the individual. Look, we're not trying to compete or compare ourselves to being a Bill and Melinda Gates or a Warren Buffett in terms of the impact that we're having. I mean, from a dollar's perspective, they take huge bets on different areas of philanthropy, trying to eliminate malaria in Africa. Those types of things are very calculated by large private foundations that are going out and approaching that. From the individual level, I think it's just individual's choice. Like, David mentioned earlier, and I know Rose talked about it too, there were times where you couldn't give as much just financially, or there's some organizations that are more favored to you than others. And I don't think I have any place to judge that. I think that the role of the charity or the recipient of the gift, even if it's a small one, the role of the recipient is to really just do great stewardship and say thank you to the donors for what they've done, because that's the way that they're going to be able to get larger contributions in the future, as long as they continue to steward those gifts and say thank you to their donors.
Right. And speaking about donors, I ask a really tough question of Rose and of David. Do you consider yourselves to be philanthropists? Are you comfortable with that word, Rose?
When Adele first used that word to me to describe me, she said that David had the same reaction. I'm not a philanthropist. I'm just not in that league. Excuse me. I'm sorry, there's noise. But especially Gideon, after reading your book, yeah, I am a philanthropist. I've given of my time as well as some resources. And to answer the question, is it better to give a lot to one or two or not? I knew I was going to have an opportunity to give a lot to an organization. I actually split it between two, one of them being Adele. I'm sorry, I have no way of shutting that off. I don't know the way. So I knew I'd have a unique, this was a one-time opportunity, and I split it between Yad Sarah and something else. And I know I'll never be able to do that again, but I think it's important for me to give smaller amounts to other organizations and to continue giving to Yad Sarah on a smaller level than that one-time opportunity. I don't think you have to make a choice. I think it's whatever moves you at the moment. And with the crisis in Ukraine right now, you may be more tempted to give money in that direction and less in another direction at the moment. It's a very emotional thing to donate. And that's where the high comes from.
Correct. Yeah. And David, you want to take a stab at that too? Philanthropist?
Well, I stabbed at it before. I said I give a lot of more minor donations, we'll say less than $100, to lots of organizations, because I can't see. There's anti-Semitism. You want to give to organizations like Camera. You want to give to people with disabilities. You want to give to hospitals. You want to give to programs in Israel where they give it to the pregnant people so that they shouldn't have abortion because they don't have the funds to have a baby. And then you give at the other end for the people who are not buried, and there are organizations like the Hebrew Fund and so forth. So there are so many wonderful things that one wants to give to. So therefore I give, like I say, more minor amounts to many of them. Then I told you before that I give middle amounts to organizations that I'm closer to, that do major, exciting work. And then I give major to organizations like Yad Sarah and other organizations, which I feel very close to, which I would say about half a dozen organizations in my life. So you
do
can't
you
give to one and not the other. I think you have to blend it at different levels, like they both said, different amounts for different organizations.
So do you consider yourself a philanthropist?
Oh, so like Rose said, when Adele sent me a thing, I want you to be part of a webinar. I said, I am not a philanthropist. If you want a philanthropist, call me up. And I live in a very wealthy neighborhood and I will get you philanthropists. She said, no, we want just regular people. Exactly what Rose said.
Well, I think that Rose responded that you could be a regular person and a philanthropist at the same time. And I see that Gideon is nodding his head. And for those who don't know who Adele is Adele Goldberg, who's executive director of Friends of Yad Sarah and does a terrific job. So Gideon, do you agree that any donor can be a philanthropist, and philanthropist doesn't mean that you're the wealthiest person on the block?
Yeah, I think that you earn that title if you're, giving your time or your money to organizations. It doesn't have to mean that you don't have to be a billionaire to be a philanthropist. We're all people that are giving back to society. We believe in being in humankind and being kind and bringing joy to others. And I think to me, that's what the definition is. It's not the dollars, it's really the intent.
Right. Thank you very much. Rose, please.
I would like to ask Gideon about how do you handle the outlook that some people have, charity begins at home? How do you convince the people, or should you even try to convince people to give other than just at home?
I think that it's just planting seeds for, I'm not the evangelist for converting people who are not philanthropically inclined. Like some people, they'll just never give. And so, but you're a leader, Rose, because you're on this call today and you're showing other people, you're sharing your story and what inspired you as a donor for Yad Sarah and giving to other organizations, and the same thing with David. So I think it's really the actions that we take, that we show others that there are other ways to give, both small and large. And so asking somebody to give to a specific organization and their response is that, well, maybe that wasn't what their major joy was going to come from. Maybe it's going and taking them to Starbucks and showing them that you can buy somebody else's coffee for them, or some other way to show them some inspiration and show some leadership.
I think on that note, that this webinar has been inspiring to hear from all three of you talking about giving, and anyone, the title of this webinar is Anyone Can Make a Difference, and all three of you have certainly made a difference, not only in your own lives and your family's lives, but beyond the home, Rose, but in the community's life and in the global environment as well, within which we live. And I want to give each one of you an opportunity for some closing remarks. I'll start, ladies first. I'll start with Rose. We'll go to David, and we'll end with Gideon. Rose, a few closing comments.
It's rewarding to know that I can help someone else.
Thank you. That truly is an inspiration. David?
To me, it's been wonderful giving anywhere. And to me, as was mentioned a short while ago, you don't have to have the money. Just saying thank you to somebody, just showing concern for someone, I think it's more hands-on that gives the greater reward than the actual financial aspect. Because then you're giving of yourself, you're giving of your personality, you're giving of everything you feel within you, and not just signing a piece of paper to give the funds for that. And the whole thing over here is that you have to give in such a way that you don't have any personal gain from it, that you simply want to give to other people to make them happy. And the whole thing with giving to me is that throughout my whole life, every time giving has been a wonderful experience because it's always giving back. You do compassion for somebody, people will have compassion for you. You have mercy for somebody, people will have mercy for you. So therefore, you can't live in a world where you're only concerned about yourself. You really have to live in a world where you're concerned about others, and then everything is going to go back, and gratitude will come back to you in the end.
Right. Thank you so much, David. When we're going to end this with Gideon's last comments. Gideon?
Thank you. 3 points that I want to bring up. First is, did you know that Benjamin Franklin, that he started an endowment upon his death with $9,000, and he said that that money shouldn't be touched for 200 years. At the end of that time, that it should go to apprentices and artisans. And that $9,000 turned into over $7 million over that 200-year period of time. So planting the seeds now as a donor, even if it's just a small amount, is something that could really have that butterfly effect on the rest of the world down the road. So that's the first point. The second point is just some of the tangible and intangible components of giving. It makes us feel happy. It helps our health. It helps to promote cooperation and social connection for all of us. It evokes gratitude, and it is truly contagious when you bring other people into the fold, one way or the other. Finally, I'll start to look at other ways of giving just from the folks here that have been sharing. We talked about the amounts that you could give. And there's a quote from the Dalai Lama, which is, if you think you're too small to make a difference, try sleeping with a mosquito. And I'll close at that point. And thank you all for having me on the panel today.
All right, thank you, Gideon. And for our audience, please, you should really get this book. It's by Gideon Bernstein, entitled "Giving a Handbook to Happiness for the Modern Philanthropist." It's easy reading, and it's filled with very important lessons about charity. And we thank Gideon for participating with us from California, and for David and Rose on the East Coast. It's really a pleasure having all three of you. And our thanks to our audience as well for participating with us in this very, very engaging conversation. As Gideon, Rose, and David shared, there is a helper's high, a warm glow, or a positive feeling that comes with charitable giving and knowing that you helped others. Each donation to Yad Sarah helps someone. So if you're inclined, if you're so inclined, let's drop the donation link into the chat. Adele, please do that. Thank you very much. Also, Friends of Yad Sarah has launched a new initiative, Share Your Story. We've heard several stories over the course of this webinar. We're collecting written or video testimonials from people who received assistance from Yad Sarah. And if you know someone who has received assistance from Yad Sarah, please let them know as well, or someone who just generally supports what Yad Sarah does. When you submit your story, you'll help us reach a much wider audience, allowing us to help more people in Medinat Yisrael, in the land of Israel, in the state of Israel. Please find the link in the chat to share your testimonial. Please feel free to contact Friends of Yad Sarah, Adele Goldberg, with any questions. It's truly been a pleasure to serve as your host today. And my thanks again to Rose, to David, and to Gideon for joining in this webinar. And thanks again to our audience. Shalom to all. Thank you so much.